There is a quiet frustration that lives inside most conversations, the kind that creeps up unnoticed until it becomes almost unbearable. You speak, and words drift into a void, as if the person across from you is a stranger wearing a familiar face. It is unsettling to admit, but perhaps it is not them ignoring you, but something deeper inside yourself, something you haven't faced. Have you ever asked yourself why it always feels like no one truly listens, and avoided the discomfort of answering honestly, because this is where things become uncomfortable? When you speak, you imagine that your words hold power, that the act of explaining will bridge some invisible gap in understanding. You believe that repetition, emphasis, or clarity will finally make them hear you, as if communication were a simple cause and effect. You tell yourself that the problem is theirs, that they are distracted, rude, or careless, and this belief shields you from deeper unease. It feels natural to assume that if you try harder, they will finally grasp your meaning, as though listening were a skill under voluntary control. You might even rehearse your words in your head, imagining the perfect phrasing, visualizing their reactions with an almost obsessive precision. And yet, time after time, your expectations collapse, leaving a residue of tension, a subtle accusation lodged between you and them. You notice patterns and try to predict outcomes, counting on your preparation to guarantee comprehension, and this anticipation provides a fleeting sense of safety. It is tempting to think that the frustration stems only from their unwillingness, that your effort is complete and the fault lies elsewhere entirely. In these moments, you may feel righteous, justified in your irritation, as if awareness of the problem alone grants moral authority in the conversation. But beneath this apparent control, a dissonance grows, whispering that something is slipping, that your assumptions may not hold as firmly as you hope. You rationalize, you rehearse, you plan, all in the name of efficacy, yet the results remain inconsistent, unpredictable, and often disappointing. It is easy to convince yourself that logic, patience, or charm will solve the silence, while ignoring the strange inertia that persists despite effort. This imagined mastery over attention and comprehension is seductive because it preserves identity, making you the competent, clear-minded speaker who simply faces stubborn resistance. And yet, the gap persists, and the more you trust in your strategy, the more invisible it seems to become, like chasing a shadow you cannot catch. If this is already making sense to you, it means you're starting to notice patterns most people never see. Subscribe and let's keep exploring how the mind really works. Now, this is where things start to get uncomfortable. And then the first crack appears, subtle and disorienting, the moment you notice that no matter how precise your words are, they seem to vanish midair. You realize that comprehension is not just about clarity, that attention is not fully under anyone's control, not even your own expectations of it. It feels like the floor beneath conversation is shifting, a quiet unease, as if language itself betrays you, refusing to transmit meaning exactly as intended. Perhaps it is not a failure of the other person, but a fracture in the assumption that communication is a linear, predictable process, where effort guarantees response. You catch yourself repeating phrases, rephrasing explanations, adjusting tone, all while a sense of futility grows, a small alarm sounding in the mind. And in these repetitions, a hidden truth emerges. Listening is not purely voluntary. It is a complex negotiation of attention, memory, and perception that cannot be commanded. You feel the tension between intent and reception, between expectation and reality. And it is in that tension that discomfort resides, unspoken but persistent. Something inside recognizes that control is limited, that influence over perception is more fragile than assumed, yet letting go feels almost impossible to even consider. You may notice a rising frustration, a subtle self-doubt, the nagging question of whether your clarity is inadequate, even though logic insists it should suffice. The first crack is not loud or dramatic. It whispers, insidious and patient, hinting that your assumptions about control and comprehension are dangerously incomplete. And once this whisper enters awareness, it seeds uncertainty about every conversation, every expectation, leaving a residue of unease that you cannot fully name. It is the beginning of a subtle shift, the recognition that something is occurring beyond your conscious strategy, something deeper, something psychological that cannot be solved with words alone. And this is where most people misunderstand what's really happening. The brain is a pattern-seeking machine, and over time, it learns to respond to repeated interactions with predictable strategies, even if those strategies are ineffective. From childhood, listening is reinforced or ignored based on subtle social rewards, teaching the mind which signals matter and which can be safely disregarded without consequence. If someone interrupts or dismisses your ideas frequently, your brain begins to anticipate this pattern, subtly altering perception to accommodate expected neglect without conscious awareness. Attention itself is a limited resource, and the brain prioritizes survival signals over cognitive effort, sometimes deciding that your words are less urgent than competing mental priorities. Habits form when responses are repeated, not judged, which is why some people appear incapable of listening even when they consciously wish to do so. It is not cruelty or malice, but an adaptive mechanism, a survival shortcut that favors energy conservation over attentive presence, shaping every conversation unconsciously. Think of a child repeatedly ignored during play. The brain learns that elaboration and explanation yield little reward, and this learning persists into adulthood in subtle, invisible ways. Even social norms reinforce this. In busy environments, constant distraction trains the mind to filter incoming information selectively, prioritizing only certain voices, tones, and cues above others. Over time, these neural pathways strengthen, creating automatic responses that feel natural, comfortable, and almost impossible to override with conscious effort alone. Your frustration is then not only social, but physiological, the limbic system quietly influencing irritation before your rational mind even catches up to the thought. And yet, because the behavior is unconscious, it is often interpreted personally, as if the other person's failure to listen reflects a deliberate choice rather than conditioned automaticity. Consider an office scenario. Repeated interruptions teach attention to wander toward conflict or novelty, rather than consistent focus on routine explanations, embedding a neurological pattern of inattention. If you've noticed this in your own life, describe what happened. Someone reading may recognize themselves in it. This is why logic and patience alone rarely produce comprehension. The brain has learned survival patterns that override intention, keeping attention fleeting and inconsistent in ways hard to perceive. And the deeper question arises, if listening is learned, what has been learned, and what cost does it carry to identity itself? When you're ready, I can continue with Section 5, the hidden payoff, and Section 6, the identity trap next. Do you want me to continue? Beneath the surface of inattentiveness lies an invisible reward, a subtle comfort in not engaging fully, a psychological payoff that few ever notice. Some people cling to distraction because complete attention feels like vulnerability, exposure to critique, or expectation that the mind has learned to avoid. There is relief in tuning out, a quiet ego boost from preserving mental energy, protecting self-image by controlling what is absorbed from the outside world. Listening fully demands presence, responsibility, and emotional labor, and avoidance provides a hidden sense of safety, reinforcing the habit through subtle gratification. Even in relationships, the payoff is tangible. Attention is withheld strategically, giving power over interactions without overt confrontation, a silent assertion of autonomy. You might notice that habitual listeners, ironically, gain a sense of control in letting others speak while they preserve mental space for their own priorities. Every ignored word carries unspoken acknowledgement, The listener maintains distance, avoids discomfort, and protects identity, even if the other person senses frustration silently building. And yet, recognizing this is uncomfortable because it means that the failure to hear is not entirely external, not merely a flaw in the other person. It challenges assumptions about fairness, morality, and intent, revealing that inattention is sometimes a choice, masked as automatic behavior but secretly beneficial to the listener. The payoff is emotional, subtle, and often unconscious, producing a cycle where attention is limited, comprehension is selective, and irritation grows predictably. Consider the strange satisfaction of interpreting a long-winded explanation. It feels gratifying in the moment, though it erodes connection and leaves unspoken tension lingering afterward. This hidden reward makes logic ineffective. Attempts to persuade or clarify confront a pattern reinforced by subtle pleasure, not conscious malice, complicating every interaction. Even when conscious awareness occurs, the brain has already anchored satisfaction in avoidance, embedding the payoff into behavior before reasoning can intervene. It is unsettling to realize that frustration may partly stem from your own expectations colliding with another's learned, self-serving strategies, invisible yet potent in shaping dialogue. And yet, this only scratches the surface of identity, because the behavior has another layer, far more resistant to observation and understanding. Over time, inattention becomes woven into identity, not just a habit but a defining lens through which the world is filtered and experienced. It is no longer a matter of choice. Listening patterns shape how someone sees themselves and what they consider possible in any conversation. Logic fails because the behavior is now encoded in the sense of self, resistant to reasoning, impervious to explanation, and protected by unconscious loyalty to identity. Correcting the pattern threatens a fundamental aspect of self, provoking subtle defense mechanisms, rationalizations, and even denial to preserve stability and coherence in perception. For some, being inattentive is a silent shield, a core part of who they believe themselves to be, protecting ego and maintaining equilibrium in social landscapes. Consider the person who constantly interrupts yet sincerely believes they are a good listener. Their behavior and what if the struggle to be heard is never really about the other person, but about the space between expectation and perception, an invisible gap you have always navigated? This gap is not a flaw to fix, but a mirror reflecting assumptions about control, understanding, and the certainty of human attention that rarely holds in reality. You begin to notice that conversations are not linear pipelines for meaning, but dynamic landscapes shaped by perception, attention, and subtle psychological biases that resist prediction. Listening is not a skill that can be enforced. It is a negotiation of presence, desire, and emotional investment, fluctuating unpredictably with internal priorities and survival instincts. Your frustration often signals more about your internal scripts than theirs, a reflection of assumptions, ego, and the unconscious belief that comprehension is owed rather than earned. It becomes clear that anger at inattentiveness is itself a pattern, a projection of expectation onto minds already operating under their own invisible rules and rewards. The person who never listens is not broken, nor are you failing. Both of you are actors in a psychological ecosystem shaped by conditioning, payoff, and identity. Every pause, interruption, or drift of attention is not a judgment but an artifact of neural patterns, unconscious survival strategies, and subtle emotional investments that rarely align perfectly. And as you watch this unfold, it may dawn on you that clarity is a myth, comprehension a fragile construct constantly negotiated in real time, never guaranteed by effort alone. This shift in perception does not erase frustration, it reframes it, transforming irritation into a quiet recognition of reality, a subtle recalibration of expectations and understanding. And yet, The change is barely perceptible at first, more a gentle adjustment in awareness than a sudden epiphany, requiring patience and observation rather than effortful intervention. This perspective dissolves the illusion of control, revealing that mastery over attention is partial, context-dependent, and intertwined with identity, emotion, and history in ways rarely acknowledged. And this opens the door to noticing small, almost imperceptible shifts in interaction, which quietly alter the dynamics of comprehension without explicit effort or confrontation. But to experience this fully, we need to slow down even further and observe the subtle currents beneath conversation. In the quiet shift, you notice moments of listening emerging without intent, like a soft tide of attention that moves naturally rather than being commanded or enforced. The brain relaxes, ego steps back, and comprehension occurs in its own rhythm, revealing that presence is less about control and more about attunement. You begin to observe patterns without judgment, noticing how attention drifts, returns, or lingers in unpredictable ways, and the tension of expectation gradually softens. Even silence becomes meaningful, not a void to fill but a space where perception, reflection, and understanding quietly interweave in the background of interaction. You recognize that influence exists in subtle signals, in timing, tone, and patience, rather than in force or argument, and this realization shifts perception without immediate action. The quiet shift is less dramatic than confrontation, more like a gentle refraining of awareness, where observation replaces insistence and presence replaces expectation. You see that listening is not linear or controlled, but emergent, arising spontaneously when attention, context, and subtle engagement align naturally and unpredictably. And in noticing this, irritation loses its grip because the mind accepts that control was never absolute, and influence exists in subtler, almost imperceptible ways. This awareness does not solve comprehension instantly, but it opens a space for reflection, curiosity, and recognition that frustration is itself a response, not a verdict. And so, small interactions accumulate, micro-adjustments in attention and perception quietly reshape communication without effort, argument, or insistence, creating a soft rhythm that slowly alters relational patterns. You begin to feel that comprehension is not owed, attention is not given.